So we're doing a new series called The Upside Down Kingdom, and it is about the famous Sermon on the Mount that Jesus talks about. And we spoke about how in the first few lines of this message, Jesus is telling us how anyone can enter this upside down kingdom. And today we are going to focus on the second aspect that Jesus talks about, is the promise he gives of blessedness for those who mourn. This is very countercultural to what we may think. How can someone be blessed when they are sad? That is something that's only possible in the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And that's why we call this an upside down kingdom, because this is from the sermon which they say is the greatest sermon ever preached by the greatest person who ever lived. So I want to speak about three brief things this evening for us. This whole idea of kingdom and identity to begin with. And we want to talk about kingdom and mourning, what it is in God's kingdom. And then finally, the encouraging aspect of kingdom and comfort, which is the promise. Kingdom and identity. Who am I? That is a question that we always are asking at the back of our minds, and we let our lives lived to answer that question. You know, I grew up in a city called Chennai in South India. It's one of the best cities in the world. And I grew up in the northern part of Chennai, which has a slightly different connotation. That's the hot spot for gangsters and drug dealers, and historically the poorer part of the town. You know, my parents they have schools, they were trying to reach out to those kids to educate them. And so they put me in a school there, and all my friends were, kids of gangsters and drug dealers, and they very quickly had a significant influence in my life. And even before I was in my second grade, I was jumping school and doing all sorts of things that just scared the daylights of my parents. And they thought, we need to move this guy to a different school because he's going to end up just like them. And so I was changed to a very elite school, which was attended by all the influential people in town, movie stars, kids, and politicians. And I joined in third grade. The very first week, I get bullied by these kids. And I remember how painful that experience was. And all of them had their friends already because they've been there since kindergarten. And I'm here trying to desperately make friends and never succeeded. And so in middle school, I suddenly discovered I have this gift of speaking, and I started excelling in speech and debate, and I was winning prizes and went all unbeaten throughout middle school and high school, and suddenly I got some attention. Now people would respect me. People wanted to be friends with me, And that made me realize, this is what's important in life. And I let that be my first definition in life: success and performance. So I go to high school, and the same trend continues. I was a president scout, and I was representing my state, and went and shook hands with the president of India, and I come back, and my dad, with whom I never had a good relationship, was in his deathbed. And when I showed this to him, I could see his eyes light up. And in the last 3 months of his life, he had a new love for me. He started telling everybody, hey, you know how cool my son is? And I realized, wow, it takes me to go and shake the president of my country's hand to win my own father's love. So I guess performance matters again. So I end up growing in my life always thinking, I need to do something so people can love me. I need to do something so people can have a relationship with me. And I continued on the same trend in college. was in leadership roles and things like that. But constant in my mind, this is how I worked. But still, at the end of the day, there is this eerie emptiness within me. Because your success story lasts only for a few days. People forget very quickly. Charles Taylor, who is a leading anthropologist, he was one of my profs at Fuller Seminary. He made the statement, which is very profound, about identity. He says, we define our identity always in dialogue with, sometimes in struggle against, the things our significant others want to see in us. Let me repeat. We define our identity in dialogue with, sometimes in struggle against the things our significant others want to see in us. To put it in simple language, it says we are always worried about what others are thinking about us. We always try to live our life in a way that we feel will give us approval from those around us. And so we think we need to always be in this performance mode. And for me, it was success. It was performance. I don't know what it is for you. What is your list? What are you filling that void with in your life? Maybe for some, it's for wanting to fit in. It's listening to a particular style of music or doing a particular lifestyle that others will approve of. And you feel then you will be loved, then you will be accepted. We're all chasing after that. And I'm guaranteeing if you are still in that chase, you haven't found it. It is in this context Jesus is coming and telling us that we have been running after the wrong things. These things are valued by this world. He calls us the kingdom. But in reality, no one really likes you because you are smart or successful. Most of the times, it only breeds jealousy. And it's still empty. So Jesus says, I am here. He goes and picks 12 guys who normally anybody would not pick to be in their dream team. 12 ordinary fishermen and folks who did not have anything significant to boast about. No one would think great about these guys, so he brings them together and he sits them before this huge crowd who now goes towards him because they see Jesus is doing these great miracles and healing and they think he is some cool guy. And he says, you know what? I have come to build a new kingdom and I'm going to build a new breed of disciples in my kingdom who are going to be radically different from those of this world. And I'm going to give you an identity which is so countercultural to what the world gives you. And this identity is something I desire for you and me because this is going to make you a blessed man. And this identity he invites us to have is being a kingdom man and a kingdom woman in his kingdom. And this is an upside down kingdom. That is the real blessing. We all want to be blessed, and that's what we are seeking approval from. He says, this blessedness you're going to receive is not going to come through you by being successful or powerful or rich or anything that can happen on the outside that you are seeking. This blessedness, this deep satisfaction is something that can only happen on the inside, which only I can give you. And as I shared before, the word blessedness that Jesus says, he says, you know what is really going to make you happy? You know what is really going to make you a blessed person? It is not more money, more power, more positions, more performance. It is becoming like me. In a real sense, he is the only blessed person that doesn't need something external to come and create a sense of joy or happiness. And he's willing to give that to you and me. And he says, I want to invite you to come and be part of this new kingdom, and I want to make you a blessed man and a blessed woman. C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Weight of Glory, says this. He says, God finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. And so Jesus is here telling us, I know you are looking for your identity, something that is going to give you satisfaction in all the wrong places. It's not going to give you. I can give it to you, so come to me. And so this Sermon on the Mount, or the Beatitudes as it is called, it applies to everyone. You cannot pick and choose, I want to just like one of this out of the 10. I like this being a merciful person, so let me just pick on that. He says, no, if you want to be in my kingdom, you need to be displaying all of these things all the time. And so he says, let me tell you how you can enter this kingdom. And normally, for entering into any place, it's going to depend on what you have to offer. But Jesus says, if you want to enter into my kingdom, you need to first come to a place where you can know you don't have anything to offer. You are spiritually a bankrupt person. And so he says the first thing is, blessed are the poor in spirit. We spoke about that last week. Seeing that how we are utterly incapable of constantly being good all the time. And today he talks about what is that going to lead us. If you have experienced that, if you have come to reality about that, you can't just be there. It's going to move you to the next step, the next phase, which is, blessed are those who mourn. Mourning. What is mourning? Why does Jesus say, how many people would want this? This is not how you recruit people into your dream team. But that's what Jesus says needs to happen. If you want to be in this upside down kingdom I'm building, you need to experience mourning. The Greek word that he uses for mourn is pentos, or from which comes the word pathos or pathological. It's when our body gets infected by a virus or a bacteria that's called pathology. It's a pathogen. It just shuts our whole body down. So in a similar sense, he is talking, when you discover your emptiness, your spiritual bankruptcy, it's going to produce this pathos in you. This is a word that is used in the Bible most of the time to describe intense grief. Of the 9 terms that are used to define this word sorrow, this is the most severe form of the word. And especially when someone is grieving over the loss of a loved one, that is when they use this word. For example, Jacob's grief when he thinks that his son was killed. Joseph was killed by a wild animal. They use this word. I experienced this kind of grief just a year ago along with my family when we lost our brother-in-law. I've never experienced that amount of intense grief in my whole life. When you lose someone you love so dearly, it affects every aspect of your body, the spiritual, the emotional, the physical. I started having jitters in my lower jaw starting that very night, and it's still there till this day. I couldn't sleep for more than 4 to 5 hours for an entire year. And my body started reacting. My hormones were messed up. I put on like 20 pounds in 1 year. Grief is terrible. That's how intense grief is when you lose someone you love. And Jesus says that's the exact intensity of grief you would feel if only you can see the depths of your spiritual bankruptcy. So the question is, have you had that level of grief in your life, seeing the reality of who you are? If not, you have not even begun entering into this kingdom. And the verb tense of this is a present participle, which means it talks of a continuing action. It's not a one-time thing that, oh, it happened 1 year ago in my life or 10 years ago. It's something that needs to be happening every day in our lives. You know, Martin Luther, when he nailed his 95 theses, in one of them he said, the Christian's entire life is a continuous act of repentance and contrition. How do we normally handle sad situations? What do you do when you are sad? I like to eat. They call it comfort food, right? I don't know how they came up with the word comfort food. Maybe some do binge watching, on Netflix or whatever. Think, oh, maybe let me watch some funny YouTube videos that will get me over my morning. That's not going to help in this situation. When David committed the most vilest thing that anyone could think of, at a time when kings were supposed to go to war, he's out there lusting after the wife of one of his most loyal lieutenants in the army, and ends up killing him for the sake of having her in his life. And you would think when someone does that, they would know that they are doing it wrong, and he did not, and he had to be told in a very creative manner that what he has done is not something that God likes. And what we see after that is David, for the first time, sees the depth of his spiritual bankruptcy. And he writes a beautiful poem, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." And we have numerous examples of people who have had this experience. So what is Jesus talking about mourning? There are 5 things he says that we need to be mourned about if you want to have this experience of coming into this kingdom. The first thing he says is we need to mourn for our own selves, for the imperfections we see in us, for not just the different sins or the bad things we do, anger, jealousy, pride, lust, which every one of us can experience, but going deeper than that and looking at the very principle of sin itself that's operating within us. Why is it that I am going and doing these things? Am I a sinner because I sin? Or do I sin because I'm a sinner? And when I get to that point, that needs to grip me and make me mourn. Secondly, he says we need to mourn not just for our own sinful bankruptcy, but also for that we see in others. When we look especially at those around us and see they are doing the same things we do. And this is very applicable if you are married and have a family. Our children mimic the bad things that we do very beautifully. Most of the time, how our kids become angry or show anger will be exactly the way they have learned it from their parents. So don't be surprised. Why are you talking to me like this? Because they have seen you, mom and dad, talking like this all the time to each other. That should grieve us. And thirdly, says we need to mourn for the effect of sin at a broader level in the place where we live. Right here, Silicon Valley is supposed to be the most affluent place on planet Earth. The top 1% of richest people live. And it is impossible to think, even there can be issues in our neighborhood, but we know we do. There are hundreds and thousands of orphans and foster children who lack a loving home. That should create a mourning in us when we hear that. There are children in our elementary schools that we partner with who do not have a father in their house, who do not have 3 good meals to eat. There was a family, we heard a story of one of the child saying he eats cereal for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is just 2 miles from where we live, right here in the Silicon Valley. That should create a mourning in us, does it? But what about racism? Social justice? Those things should create a deep sense of mourning. The brokenness of this world that comes from a collective spiritual bankruptcy of a group of people should help us to mourn for them. Does it bother us? Does it create a mourning in us? And fourthly, mourning for the world. When we look at the world outside, globally, so much bad things happen. Wars and poverty, all because of man's selfishness and pride. I was reading this week in an article published by Open Doors USA that an armed attack happened 3 days ago. It doesn't come up in CNN. In the northwestern Central African Republic, which left more than 50 residents dead and many wounded. These massacres took place in a tiny village near the town of Paua, and the organization Doctors Without Borders published this story, and they spoke to some of the survivors, and they shared the way in which this heinous attack happened. And one of them said gunmen were wearing military fatigues, an army with automatic rifles. They arrived in their village, and they asked to just see the community leaders to organize a general meeting. And then the people gathered under a mango tree, he said. Then they started tying them up. He said they tore my short shirt to tie my arms. They piled us on top of each other, then started shooting us. It felt like raining bullets. This happened just this week. That should create a sense of mourning in us. And lastly, the mourning needs to come because we know that God is mourning over our sin. He knows how this makes God, who sent his own Son to redeem us, feels about this. This is the mark, he says, of a kingdom man and a kingdom woman. This is a good mourning. Because this is not going to end here. This is going to take you to a better place. And so he concludes this with a promise. He says, if you are experiencing this mourning in your life, if you have truly, authentically seen the depths of your spiritual bankruptcy, you will feel intensely sad to the same extent like you would feel like if you lost a loved one, for the state of your heart, for the state of how you see this is affecting the world around you, starting with your family, your neighborhood, and the global world at large. If you have gone through this, good news, you are entering the kingdom, and I have a blessing I want to pronounce for you. And the blessing he pronounces is, you will be comforted. Comforted. Kingdom and comfort. He says you can be comforted because, Jesus didn't just preach this and walk away like an expert. He actually paved the way to take our spiritual bankruptcy and sin upon himself. And he is not going to look at you and me and say, if you need to come to me, here are the list of things you need to do. You need to perform. You need to be successful. You need to be a morally good person. You need to be a religious guy. Only then you can come to me. And if you have tried like that, like I did in my life, and you have hit the end of the road and tired, he looks at you and says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Wow, how comforting that is. Living like that is a tiring thing. Maybe you think even God is like that, which is what I thought. If for my own father I need to perform to earn his love, maybe I need to be this perfect person before God can love me. I need to clean up my act. I need to stop doing all these things and then go to God, and then maybe he will accept me and says, welcome into my kingdom. He says, no, 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 no. Because you can never do that. The harder you try to be this good man, the more difficult it will be for you, and the harder you will fail. But he says, I can give you a rest, because you can never meet up to the standards that I expect of you, and you can never do that. So I am going to come into this world and do that. It is spoken about Jesus several hundred years before he was born, that he was a man of sorrows himself and acquainted with grief. And he prayed before he died in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweating blood. What was he sorrowful about? He was God. He was perfect. There was nothing spiritually imperfect in him. But his sorrow was for you and for me. Because he loves you and loves me, that he wanted to come into this world to take your sin and mine on the cross. And now he says you can be comforted, because I have created a way for you to come to me without performing anything on your own. And so this promise of comfort comes when we look at Jesus. And then he also gives the process. How do we receive this comfort? He says in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 10 and 11, he says there's a difference between a worldly sorrow and a godly sorrow. You know, a worldly sorrow is you feel bad and terrible when you messed up. You do something wrong and you're afraid of the consequences of your actions. You don't want to get caught, or you don't want to be in trouble. But a godly sorrow is something, he says, that leads to a changed heart. The Bible uses the word called repentance. You know, Jesus meets this guy called Zacchaeus who has been ripping people off in the name of collecting taxes, and all he had to do is when he sees Jesus, he invites him into his home, and he starts having this inward change out and is showing that instantly in action by saying, I'm going to give back 4 times more than what I took. And that's comforting to know that when we hit that spot, God is going to grant us a repentant heart to change. Have you experienced that in your life? That's the most comforting thing to know. Hey, I don't have to try. I need to surrender myself. I need to own up. I need to acknowledge and come before this holy God and says, I am tired, God. I can never match up to what you did. But please give me this changed heart. And that's going to make us happy. It's going to be a blessed life. And that's the comfort we have in Jesus. And we can receive this comfort through prayer and action. When we are bothered by something in our own heart, or when we are bothered when we see homelessness, or children who are in foster care, or orphans, or any of the social evils that tugs our heart, the first thing we can do is go to God in prayer, because we can know that God is going to change that. Our prayers are going to be answered. And sometimes He may even take you to go and be that change agent to deal with that and create a change in this world. And I'm so inspired by some of our women and Pastor Tad who go week in and week out to build relationships with these children at Randall in tutoring. The kids who don't get to eat delicious meals, who don't get to experience love. As we prayed and as people got burdened and went, you can talk to them and see how comforting it is to know that your life can be used to bring hope to someone. And that's blessedness, my friends, in God's kingdom. You don't have to work hard to merit it. In fact, you cannot. Once you have this Jesus in your life, once you enter into His kingdom, your life is going to be fulfilling because change is going to happen from the inside out. He's going to show you your spiritual bankruptcy. He's going to lead you into a morning that brings comfort. I remember days in my school when there are times when I would not win certain things. That would make me extremely sad and think, oh, now people are not going to like me. Or when I don't have something great to go and show my parents and think that they're not going to love me anymore. But with Jesus, it's the other way around. When we go and say that I am spiritually bankrupt, and when we pray and experience this deep mourning in our lives for us and for the world around us, He says, I'm going to comfort you and I'm going to make you a kingdom man and a kingdom woman who can pass on this comfort to this broken world. So I want to challenge you all this evening to take some time in your personal lives to read this sermon together in one sitting. It's 3 chapters where he unpacks what is this upside down kingdom. Matthew chapter 5 to 7, or even just these 10 verses. I want to challenge you to read these maybe multiple times a day and pray and ask God that these truths will become realities in your life. And this is my challenge, especially to our young people who are leaving to college, that I would love you to have this experience before you go to those places, so that when you are there, you can be God's kingdom man and kingdom woman. You can show them what an upside down kingdom looks like. You can show them how you are able to experience rest and peace, even if all around you life is going crazy, because that is beautiful. That is going to bring comfort to someone wherever God will take you. And if this is an experience God is leading you right now, I want to invite you to join us in prayer. And if you want to take those next steps, you could come talk to me or any of us. We'll be happy to help you with. Let's pray.